So welcome everybody to the Protecting Your Legacy webinar series. This is our first webinar in a 7-part series, and tonight we're going to be talking about setting goals and family communication in terms of making sure those goals can be set in a healthy way. Before we start with the actual content, I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with Zoom. So if you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, you should have a toolbar that pops up, and from there you can turn your video off and on. That's just a toggle. It'll click on and off. And again, the same with the mute. So I would ask that when we have our speakers speaking, if you can keep yourselves mute, that will avoid dogs running by and motorcycles driving by and that sort of thing, and sort of help everybody be able to focus. We have specifically chosen the Zoom meeting platform. There are 2 platforms. One is Zoom Meeting and one is Zoom Webinar. This is probably more than you ever wanted to know about Zoom. But the Zoom Meeting function allows us to see everybody's face or to see your screen, your name on the screen, and it allows you to unmute and ask questions so we can have a conversation and try to mimic as much as possible the opportunity to be in a room together, and hopefully that will help facilitate some conversation. The other thing I just wanted to mention about Zoom, in case you don't know, is if you move your cursor again to the bottom of the screen, that toolbar will pop up. And one of the options you have there is called chat. And if you tap on the chat, you will see that a little box appears, and you have the ability to type in a message, and it's probably currently set to its default everyone. So when you type something in and hit enter, it will populate the screen and everyone will be able to see it. You could, if you wanted, click that drop-down menu that says everyone and message someone privately if that's of interest to you. But this is an excellent way for us to communicate. It's an excellent way for you to ask questions while we're going through the presentations. And it's a good way for us to sort of just share information. So just to make sure we know that everybody can use the chat function, if you could please put into the chat function the town your land is located in, and if you could also put in your favorite plant or animal that you have ever seen on your property, that would be fun too. So go ahead and just type that in. I'm going to do the same thing. Ooh, Montgomery bobcats, Fisher cats. Oh, I love fox. Penguins and owls. Nice.
I don't want to sound ignorant, Paul, but
yeah,
I see that little thing says chat.
Yep.
I'm clicking on it all together, and I don't see how I can type anything in.
Okay, so you do see the chat in the toolbar on the bottom?
Yep, I saw it.
And if you click on it once,
I did.
Does a dialog box come up in the middle of the screen?
No.
Nothing comes up?
No.
Okay. If you scroll over, does anything pop up?
I see a share screen, I see a record, I see reactions, I see participants.
Yeah.
It's not that important, you know.
Okay. Well, if you click chat, it should pop up either as a dialog box. The other thing you could do, Andy, is in the top right corner of your screen, there might be a couple small boxes that say minimize. I'm wondering if you reduce your screen a little bit. If
no, I was. Now I'm in full screen.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry, Andy. I'm not quite sure how to help with that.
It's not that important. Not that
okay. All right. All right. So if you have questions, just unmute yourself, Andy, and you can just call them out. So thank you, everybody, for entering that in. It looks like we've got a great spread of towns, you know, from eastern to central to western Massachusetts, and lots of great animals out there. Oh, mostly animals. Oh, Dartmouth. Bruce Traben, you put sassafras. You are a forester at heart. I love it. That's good. Well, thank you for doing that. And that's a great place to ask any questions you have. Or it might be that during the conversation, you have a resource that was helpful to you. So you can put that resource in there, you can put that link in there, and everybody will have access to it. So the last thing we wanted to do before we go into the formal PowerPoint presentation is we just wanted to ask two quick poll questions just to get sort of people thinking about the content for tonight. So Olivia, do you mind launching the first poll question, please? So there it is. So one of the things, we're going to be talking about goals and family conversations tonight. If you can just let us know how many of you have had a conversation with your family. And it might not be applicable. Either you may not have heirs, or you may be of the mind that you want to have, you want to make the decision separately. Everything is fine. We're just trying to get a sense of how many of you had conversations. All right, so it looks like we've got 11, 17, 18 or so. Okay, that's great. I think that could be everybody, so that's great. So a little over half of you have already had a conversation. So you already might be thinking about it or talking about options, so that's great. Another 11% have said that you haven't yet, and maybe you will, maybe you won't, that's fine. And then another third or so said it's not applicable. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. And Olivia, would you mind launching that second poll, please? So we're just trying to get a sense of what some of the concerns people might have about having a conversation, and there might be more than one concern. And we're just, again, trying to get to the idea of what some of the challenges might be to help us better fine tune the content tonight and in the future. So let's see, a little over half of you noted that you don't know what the options are. That's okay. That's why you're here tonight, and that's why we're doing this webinar series. It is a very difficult conversation, right? Anytime we're dealing with death and taxes, let alone both together. And having different views is common. We hear that quite a bit, and one of our speakers, Bob O'Connor, is going to talk about some strategies for having that family conversation to try to have a healthy family conversation and try to find a solution that meets everyone's needs. Great, thank you, Olivia. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and start the presentation, the more formal piece, I guess. And our goal tonight is to try to help you set some foundation. We're thinking about this webinar series sort of as this is the foundational piece for some landowners that haven't maybe had fully the conversations they need, or maybe haven't started those, or helping landowners think through some goals that can help them during this planning process. So I want to introduce my co-speaker here, my co-host, so to speak, Bob O'Connor, who will be coming on about halfway through the presentation and giving some comments about family communication and facilitation and so forth. Bob comes with literally decades of experience with land conservation, forest management. He's the Forest and Land Policy Director at the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs, and I can hardly think of anyone that would be better than having Bob here. And then just, I know a handful of you, but just to make sure you know who I am, my name is Paul Catanzaro. I'm the State Extension Forester. I'm also an associate professor here at UMass, and I teach in the forestry program here. And I've been working for a number of years with landowners on a variety of topics, including forest stewardship, but also these conversations around conservation-based estate planning. As I mentioned, this is a PDF or a picture of a postcard we're sending out to landowners across the state to let them know about this webinar series. So I just wanted to let you know, we did receive some questions, so thank you for those that put their questions in during registration. We did receive several questions that were really pertinent to some of these webinars that we likely won't really get in depth in or even touch tonight. So there was a question about the Chapter 61 programs, and I just want to make sure people know that we're going to have a program on that in January with a DCR service forester and a local assessor. And then there was another question about using wills. And so again, next month, we're going to be having our monthly webinar on that. And then there was an excellent question about appraised value. And I want to make sure, if that's you, that you note that December 8th, we're having a webinar focusing on both the ecological but also the financial value of the land as a way for people to start making decisions and gathering information about their land. So if you haven't, I would encourage you to consider registering. You can register at masswoods.org webinars, and that's also where the recordings of all of these webinars will be located. I also want to make sure I acknowledge our funder. So the funding for our outreach work on conservation-based estate planning comes through the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, or DCR. And for those of you who might be familiar with state forests, that's DCR, but they also have a group, a cadre of foresters, the Service Forestry Program that works with landowners. And this is an initiative that comes through the Service Forestry Program called the Working Forest Initiative. And they know that these decisions are important to landowners, and your land is important to everybody. It provides tremendous public value. So some of that funding comes to this effort to help landowners learn about their options for what to do with their land in the future. And I also want to just note or recognize my colleague, Sarah Wells, who's with us tonight and will be helping answer questions in the chat. Sarah Wells and I are the recipients of this Working Forest Initiative grant funding, and she and I collaborate on organizing this. And we've also been collaborating with our colleagues at the Mass Land Trust Coalition. So I thank all of you for your funding and your hard work. So let's dive in here. We're going to use this phrase estate planning. And I know when I talk to landowners, quite often when they hear the phrase estate plan, because they're a landowner that has maybe a Chapter 61 piece of property, and so they've got a forest management plan, or maybe they've got a forest stewardship plan, or maybe they own a farm and they've got a farm plan. So I think to a lot of people, when they hear the term estate plan, they sort of think of a bounded document, like a small pamphlet or something. And what I want to encourage you to consider is that an estate plan isn't just one document. It's really a combination of documents and tools that can be used together in combination. And in doing so, it will help you as the landowner achieve both your personal and your financial goals. And we're going to get into depth into both of those areas, but it's how those tools work together. And you have options, so you want to choose the right combination of tools to achieve the right outcome, which is your goals. So in many ways, it's these all working together, and some of them help you transfer your land, some of those tools and documents like a will, and some of the tools might help you in other ways, like achieve your goals of keeping the land as it is. We've done a number of these programs over the years, and we have often had an estate planning attorney with us, and in our program or webinar next month, we will have an attorney with us. And when I started doing these, a couple of the attorneys grabbed me and said, listen, I know it's not, what this night is about, but I think it's important to let everyone know that there are a couple of documents that everyone should have. So if we had one of our colleagues here who was an attorney, they would remind me to tell you that even though we're not covering these tonight, estate planning is a large topic, and there are some must-have things that every person should have, including a will, making sure that you have designated your beneficiaries, things on like retirement plans and life insurance if you have that you have a homestead declaration that can help protect your assets at your main residence, and that you've you've assigned somebody as a durable power of attorney and a healthcare proxy so that if you become incapacitated, they can help you make decisions. So I want to be very clear here. If it's not obvious, I'm a forester. I'm not an attorney, so it's not my role to give legal advice, but wanted to just point that out. So let's get into more of the topic at hand here, which is conservation-based estate planning, and how does that differ from normal estate planning, which is, you know, admittedly this very large topic, which includes those documents and tools in the slide previous to this that we're not going to be going into. But conservation-based estate planning is sort of that narrower version of that. It's that those parts of estate planning that deal directly with land, and since all of you are landowners, this is a part of the thinking that you'll need to do. We find that all landowners know that they have options to parcelize their land or subdivide it, to sell house lots or to develop the land. But what we find is when we talk to landowners about options, not many of them know what their conservation-based options are. So how can a landowner meet their personal and financial goals using some of the same tools, but some new ones in combination to conserve the land? And that's what our goal is, to try to make sure you know your options and you're making an informed decision about meeting your goals. Because land is a unique type of asset. It's not like assets like cash or stocks and bonds. Oftentimes there's a real personal connection to land. It might be the place where your parents grew up, or where you chased frogs in the pond, or built forts, or learned tree ID, or used to take picnics, or hunted, or hiked, or snowmobiled. So land has sort of value to individuals beyond the financial value, and so that brings on some interesting characteristics to it that are not like assets like stocks and bonds and cash. It has both this personal value and this real place-based attachment, and it also has a financial value. And for many landowners, this of course is the challenge. How do we ensure that both your personal and financial needs are being met? And that's very real. So, you know, what do you need for an asset moving forward, let's say in retirement? Because life is, you know, complicated, and you need to make sure you are financially secure. That's critical. You may also have other goals, such as keeping some or all of the land undeveloped. And so how do you balance those two? You take the value, the financial value of your land, but also the personal value, and what combination can you use these tools to achieve, you know, a balance? And the good news is that land is, as an asset goes, it's very flexible. You know, it's more flexible than a gold watch or a stock and bond, and you know, it can be used in a number of different ways. So there are creative solutions to gain both financial and personal value from your land. It's a matter of sort of finding the right mix of your goals and your family's goals, if you choose to include them, and also the right combination of tools. It's important to recognize, you know, if I could just, you know, email each of you a one-page PDF that had the answer on it, you know, or the solution, or if there was some easy button I could push, believe me, I would do that. But the reality is that everybody's situation is a little bit different. People have different financial assets and different financial needs. People have different family situations. Some have children, some don't. Some have lots of children, some have one. Some have step families. Properties of different values, different ethics or ways of connecting with the property. So there are lots of different individual people out there that own your land, and so there's not one right solution. And so the trick is to sort of figure out what the right combination is for you. And the map I show at the bottom is from a case study from the Protecting Your Legacy publication that we can send you, or we may have already sent you the PDF of. And this just outlines one family's solution, which included a conservation restriction and a couple of building lots and a donation. Point being is you have options and there are creative solutions to meet your needs. So why do we care about setting goals? I think it's important to at the front end of this process to set some goals so we know what success looks like. What are we striving to do? Are we striving to ensure financial stability during retirement, for example? Are we striving for healthy family relationships? Are we striving for the success look like part or all of the property staying undeveloped? What does success look like? And I think in articulating and refining goals, we get a sense of what we're aiming for. I think it's important in terms of setting goals. I think it has the ability to either maintain family relationships, hopefully you've got good family relationships, or improve them, because it can be difficult if some of these decisions are not made ahead of time, and then a family, maybe with differing perspectives or different point of views, is left after mom or dad pass away, having to negotiate or navigate those conversations at a time of grief, or without the benefit of mom and dad there and their perspectives. So there can be a real opportunity here, a real human side in terms of maintaining these family relationships, and Bob's going to talk more about that. The other piece of this that I think is important, because when I do these programs over the last however many years, I encourage people to work with a professional. And the first, one of the first questions I hear from people is, well, how much is that going to cost? And I think, this is an area where you will save money. If you do this upfront work of having these family conversations, setting goals, and going in with some concrete idea of your family's direction, you can save some time and energy and some money when you engage, the services potentially of a professional. So I think there are lots of good reasons to work on setting goals for yourself or your family. And over the course of however many years, about 10 years we've been doing this, I recognize that this can be a very complicated subject. And so over the last few years, we've been really trying to refine how we've done the outreach and how we communicate the information. And one of the ways we've done that is by presenting landowners two questions, just to help you start thinking about the future of your land. The first is, do you want to determine who's going to own your land after you? Is that a decision you want to make? And that's sort of a yes/no question. And then that second question is, would you like to ensure that some or all of the land remains undeveloped? Do you want to see some of your land stay the way it is? And if so, that's an important goal to be able to bring to a professional. And so I think by answering these two questions and having some conversations about that, you can really start setting yourself up to articulate your goals. And we had an excellent question in the registration. Someone wanted to see some example goals. So I've included some example goals that Sarah Wells and I put together, and I'll show those in a slide or two. But I think this is sort of a good way to boil down, some of these complicated decisions about the future of your land, and start in, jumping into the pool, as it were, in an accessible way. We, just so you know, part of my position here at UMass is doing research, and I do a lot of research on landowners and what they think about the future of their land. And we asked those two questions to landowners, and we got a great response. And so when we asked people how important it was to them for them to designate the future owner, about 2/3 of landowners said that it was very or extremely important. So if you find yourself in this category, that's probably the most common category we have, right? 2/3 of landowners do feel like they want to designate their next owner. And then when we asked people, do you want to designate? how the land can be used in the future, almost half of the respondents told us that it was very important or extremely important for them to be able to have a say in what happens to their land in the future. And that was admittedly a little surprising for me. I would have thought it was less than that, but almost half of the landowners responded that they do in fact want to have some say in that. And so, that suggests to us that there is a lot of landowners out there that want to pass land on. We hear from them in a very strong way that most often it's to their children. And there's also, a significant segment, almost half of landowners, that want to see most or all of their land, stay the way it is. Importantly, when people fill out a survey, that's intention, right? It's like on January 1st, committing yourself to losing 20 pounds. That's our intention. And that intention doesn't always translate into action. And so there can be a number of reasons why people don't achieve their estate planning goals of passing land on to the person they want, or keeping the land undeveloped. And some of that could be information. Some of that could be connecting with a good person, a professional that can help you. Some of that could be the family conversation that's difficult to have. And so our goal tonight and in this webinar series is to try to remove some of those barriers and to try to help move you from whatever intention you have to action so that you can achieve your goals. So how might you start setting your goals? And this is a scale that I've shamelessly stolen from some colleagues in Oregon, although I've given them attribution on the bottom of the slide. It's a Ties to the Land program. And it's just a very simple tool. It just, asks where you are on a 10-point scale. Like, how do you view your land? And it might be that maybe you're a 1, or your family is a 1, or some people in your family are a 1, and they really see the land as a financial asset, and it's to be used, as the family needs. And on the other end of the spectrum, maybe you or your family are, consider the land a priceless heirloom, and it's something to be maintained and something to be passed down and something to be left undeveloped. And then, of course, there is a whole range of numbers in between there. So you don't have to be a 1 or a 10. You could be a 5. It's sort of there if I need it financially, but I really do recognize it as a family heirloom. Or maybe you're a 7 and you lean one way, or you're a 3 and you lean the other. So this can be a way for you to start framing what the land means to you. And it can be a good way to engage some of your family members to get a sense, if you are going to include family members, of what their perspective is on the family land. I have some other colleagues in Pennsylvania and New York that shared these with me. They call them story cards, and they ask their families they give them a stack of cards, like index cards, and they ask family members when they're working with them to choose a picture or two that represents what does this land represent to you? And it could be something on the wildlife side, it could be something on the forest management or the historic or recreation. It's a way to help start these conversations so you can start collecting the input from the decision makers that you as the landowner want to include. And that could be a spouse, a sibling, a niece, nephew, children. But at the end of the day, these are simply tools to start the conversation, to collect information about how you want or how those you're including view the land, and what does success look like? What are the goals? And importantly, what are people's needs? Is it a financial need? Is it a need to keep it open for the legacy or the heirloom value of it? And these are just simple, ways to start the conversation. I know that there are some families that have been very comfortable sitting down and having a family conversation, and have done it more formally, inviting the kids over on Saturday, and we're going to have, a nice dinner and talk about it. And I know a lot of landowners that are very comfortable, or most comfortable, doing that one-on-one. So it could be, having a conversation with your son when you're doing the dishes after a family meal, or having a cup of coffee with your daughter on a walk and bringing the topic up. However you're comfortable and however your family works is the way to do that, assuming you want to include your family in those conversations. But starting the conversation, getting a sense of their needs and their wants can help you start setting these goals. Paul, why do you have a picture of an Easter basket sitting on the slide? Well, I'm glad you asked. I do this because it reminds me of a story that my mother told me. And when I was growing up, my family celebrated Easter, and we had the tradition of hiding Easter baskets. And a few years ago, my mother told, I'm one of three kids. I've got two older brothers. She told my brothers and I that not only did she count the jelly beans in each person's Easter basket, but she counted how many purples you got, how many reds you got, how many purple, like everybody got the same number of jelly beans, and in absolute terms, then everybody got the same number of colored jelly beans. And I tell that story because I think we as parents oftentimes very much view some of these decisions as we've got to be really precise. Now, my mom's pretty OCD, so that might be an extreme example, but we oftentimes want to be really precise. We've gave one child this, and we want to give our other child the exact same. And I think it's important to have some of those conversations. Again, what do the kids need? Splitting a 100-acre property into three 33.33 acre pieces while being equal may not necessarily meet your personal or financial goals. And there's a difference between equal and fair, right? So maybe there is one of the kids that just needs a little bit more financial support. Or maybe there's one of the kids that has stuck around the area and has helped more with the land or the house, or you as you've gotten older. Having some of those open conversations can help people articulate what they need, and can help you as a parent, as a landowner, really get to some of these issues and develop a solution that is fair for everybody, and it doesn't necessarily need to be equal. So, as I mentioned, someone had that wonderful question about asking, well, what do goals look like? Well, what would that look like? So that was great. And so I spent a little time this afternoon thinking about that and had a great conversation with Sarah. And so here are a couple goals that maybe a family, and again, these are just an example, and everybody's situation is different. But maybe, our family says that the landowners say they know that they want to pass land on to the daughter for whatever reason. Maybe the daughter lives there, maybe the daughter's been more involved, maybe the daughter is more interested in the property, so they know they want to determine who's going to own it, and they know they want that to go to their daughter. They also know that they want to keep the land the way it is. And by the way it is, they mean undeveloped and in one place. They don't want to see it split up. They want to be able to see the activities done now on the property continue. That might be agriculture, that might be forest stewardship, that might be hunting, whatever it might be. This family decides they want to keep it the way it is. They do want to explore what their options are for compensation. They would like to, in terms of meeting their financial goals, they would like to see what compensation there is for conserving their land and keeping the way it is. So that's an important goal for them. And they've decided that they would like to keep a house lot out of their property, so that in the future, if they needed some funds in retirement, or there was a long-term illness, for example, and they needed some more money, some more asset, they had the opportunity to sell that house lot, or they could give that house lot to their son, who might live out of state and isn't getting the land, but as a way to compensate, to help create a fair situation. That could be one of the assets that goes to the son. So these are goals, of course, that I wouldn't expect you necessarily to leave tonight and have your refined goals. Goals like this come from conversations. They come from digesting information. They come from thinking through what your options are. They come from seeing what other landowners have done. So it's a process. And so, these might be really sort of refined goals that you could walk into an estate planning attorney's office or a land trust office and say, gee, my family and I have talked about this. These are some important things. And this would be an excellent starting point. But I also don't want you to leave here tonight thinking that, these are the goals that, or that you have to define your goals this evening. They were just examples of one families. So I've been talking quite a bit, and it's just about time for Bob to come on and talk about family communication. But I just wanted to take a breather. Are there questions that people want to talk about, or something you want to share? Or was there something in the chat pod, Sarah? No? People feeling okay? Still with me? All right. All right, well, why don't we keep moving? So I'm gonna share my screen again. And I'm gonna pass it over to you, Bob, and just let me know when you want me to advance.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I recently heard they were interviewing elementary school kids about virtual school, and one of the kids said, "It's like the internet is torturing me." And so I don't want the internet to torture you, because you probably had to look at the computer some point during the day. But I'll try to give you a little overview of the field that I kind of took on later in life. And I'll tell you that story in a second, but I've worked for the state environmental agencies for a long time. And as you might know from reading the paper or listening to the news, the state often gets in trouble with people about the decisions they make. So especially with natural resources, with state forests and parks and Quabbin Reservoir, places like that where I've worked, it's hard to make the right decision that you don't get people unhappy with what you decide. So early on in my career, way back when I was the superintendent at Quabbin Reservoir, I learned to call on people who knew a lot about conflict resolution to help us. We would get into a deep hole, into trouble, and then there was actually a agency called the Department of Conflict Resolution. Jane Wells, who was my mentor in this whole endeavor, way back when I worked at Quabbin, I used to call her up and have her come to our help. So we got into trouble over at Wachusett Reservoir many years ago. This is a picture of the North Dike, which is one of the dikes that holds back the reservoir at Wachusett. It's 2 miles long, and it's a beautiful place to walk. In fact, I'm always looking for new places to walk, as you probably are too. And I would highly recommend it. It's about 2 miles long. So we were under the gun from EPA to try to protect the reservoir better from any kind of threat. So the EPA was threatening to make us build this very, very expensive treatment plant if we didn't follow all their guidelines. And one of them was to keep people and pets away from the water. And this area is fairly close to where the water actually leaves the Wachusett Reservoir to go to Boston. So we decided that will be simple. We'll just put up a fence along the dike to keep the people away from the water. And I can't remember when we first told people that's what we wanted to do. And this is a view of the North Dike, from the North Dike. Well, the people in Clinton, where this mostly takes place, were quite upset about this. And they were saying things like, you took our land, part of some of the towns out, even at the Wachusett Reservoir, were flooded as part of the reservoir, similar to what happened later in Quabbin. People were very angry. I had to go to a public meeting in Clinton that people said was bigger than any town meeting they'd ever had. There was 450 people there. And the day of the meeting, some of the conflict people that we work with had just finished writing a book called How to Deal with an Angry Public. Someone named Pat Field, who we had worked with. So I was feverishly trying to skim his book in the afternoon before I went to the meeting, where I had to sit up front and deal with the angry public. And the meeting did not go well. The one thing I learned from Pat's book was, don't be afraid to apologize if you feel like you made a mistake. So I said, maybe we didn't present this well or think about it well enough. People were very angry. So we called in my friend Jane Wells from the Department of Conflict Resolution. We formed a little committee from people from the town, represented different points of view from the town, and then from the state agency that owned the land that wanted to put up the fence. Maybe a dozen people sat in a room, and within about a half an hour, Jane had solved the conflict. And so this happened several times. One time we had Chapter 61. We were trying to pass some changes to Chapter 61. It had been languishing in the legislature for 10 or 15 years. We called in another one of my mentors, Doug Thompson, and within like 10 minutes, he had solved the problem that was holding up moving Chapter 61 forward. And in the North Dike case, Jane Wells was able to ask a lot of questions of the people in the room and fairly quickly determined that even though the people in the town were very angry and were saying that the state was trying to take away the land from Clinton again and, never listened to them and, it was their right to walk on the North Dike, she was able to figure out that what they really were interested in was what this picture shows, a beautiful view of the reservoir. They were afraid that what we meant by a fence was like a 8-foot, very tall fence that they would be almost like looking through to see their view. And she talked to the people from the state also, and what she realized was they were mostly interested in keeping dogs out of the water and people out of the water. And a fence that was maybe 4 feet tall would be as good as a fence that's 8 feet tall, because either one people could climb over. And the fence could work if it was on the slope below the top of the dike, just as well as being on the top of the dike. So within a few minutes, everybody was like, okay, that was, and I watched this happen several times, but I couldn't really figure out what it was that these conflict mediators were doing. So at one point, Jane recommended that I go to school to learn what they do, because it seemed like we were always calling them in. So there's a program at UMass Boston, and one course at a time for 7 years, I learned a lot about conflicts, reading books like Difficult Conversations and How to Deal with Difficult People. And I'm going to try to tell you the gist of what I learned in 7 years. I highly recommend UMass Boston if you're ever there. It's a beautiful location, and I felt like every one night a week I would be like visiting the whole world, because it's the most diverse college in New England. I would hear points of view from people all over the world every week, and it was kind of like I liked going there. So there's something called the mutual gains approach to decision making. Sometimes it's called integrative decision making, and that's a different way of thinking about how to come to a decision. The normal way that we in the United States make decisions is called the competitive decision making, which is kind of like, when two people are trying to, or a person is trying to buy a car and they are trying to pay the lowest amount, and the car dealer is trying to get them to do the most amount. And, maybe if you're lucky, you get it in the middle. And if you're not lucky, you pay a lot. Or it depends on who has the power often, or who is the most insistent, or sometimes the most obnoxious about how they go about it. So this other way of making decisions and working together is kind of, instead of looking at the pie as kind of a limited thing where you're trying to get the biggest piece of the pie, and give the other people or person the smallest piece of the pie. It's kind of a different way of thinking of it. It's kind of saying we can actually expand the pie if we think creatively about it. And I would argue that land, as Paul has already mentioned, is a very creative resource. It's unlike a bank account or stocks and bonds. That's, it's got no emotional aspect to it, and it's pretty much just there. So, and actually, a lot of the things you'll learn in these seminars is there's lots of tools to kind of be more creative about how to look at land so that the pie actually can be expanded. So the other thing that is really important about this mutual gains approach to decision making and problem solving is you really need to, and this is what I learned in 7 years in a nutshell, so pay attention. A lot of times people say what their position is about something, but it doesn't really tell you what they're really concerned about. What is it that they really want? And a lot of times, people like Jane Wells would ask a lot of questions that started with why. Why do you feel that way? Why is it you're so angry with the state? And if you listen really carefully, sometimes you can hear what's behind that position, and that's what is the key to the solution. The best class that I ever took in any elementary school through college was the class on mediation, where we actually went to the court in Quincy every week, and the judge we would sit nervously in the back of the room, and people would come like really angry with each other. That might have been a conflict that went on for years, and they were in court to get what they wanted. They were doing the competitive method that the court is. And the judge would, if he or she felt like it was a case the mediators could solve, he would say, go with the mediators. And you would have these people very, very angry with each other, and you would go to this little, very stuffy conference room in the Quincy courthouse, and you'd have maybe an hour and a half to try to solve their problems. It's kind of the most challenging thing you can do, but there is a skill to it, and you really feel good when you can pull it off and help people to solve their problem. So I think there are a lot of families that own land, and Paul's poll shows this, where the inability to agree is a big challenge. I think there was 25% of the people tonight who said that they have it's a difficult conversation that they're worried about having, or there's different points of view in the family. But I would argue that the inability to get people together can often lead to the worst outcome. And the Protecting Your Legacy book, which I think Paul is sharing with everybody, is like the best publication the state has done through Paul and Sarah and others worked on that. It's because it has like 13 different case studies of real families and what they went through. Mostly there are cases that are hopeful in how they worked out. Sometimes they're a case of how the inability to agree has a bad outcome. Paul, the next slide, please. So here's just a few ideas that I kind of looking at all the different things that I learned over the slow process of getting a master's degree in conflict resolution. So, and some of them Paul has already said, but the location of the family meeting is important. I think in the Protecting Your Legacy, it mentions, maybe not the holiday get-together is not a good time to do that. Maybe having it in a neutral location is a good idea rather than one person's house or the other's. Maybe someplace that involves walking the land also, which is a kind of a way to kind of listen to what the land means to different people. And so I'm just going to go through, like, you're going to run your family meeting, and you want to make sure you give every family member uninterrupted time to say what's on their mind and what are they really hoping for with the outcome of the future of the land. And, you know, although it's something that you can't really teach about what's the difference between someone's position and what they're really interested in, it's all in the kind of listening and kind of asking questions that are kind of still listening, active listening. So you're finding what everybody in the family is really interested in, what they think is important. And listening is, and sometimes I'm not the best example of listener, but I know that it's an important thing to do. So you're trying to remember why is everybody so emotionally connected to the land. So when it's finally clear after you've listened to each family member and you think that, you know, it's clear to everybody what they're interested in. I had one case that I had to mediate in the court where it was like a landscaping job gone bad, where the couple that had hired the landscaper, who was kind of someone who worked with his hands doing landscaping jobs, and the people who owned the land were more kind of college folks, and they had a big argument about how they didn't think he did the job, and he thought he did the job. He wanted to be paid, and when you ask them the first, what do you really want? And they said, I want my money. And then they said, I don't want to pay my money. But when they each had their chance to say what it was they were interested in, the landscaper, there's a question that I was taught to ask, which was kind of, if you could walk out of the courtroom and feel like you had a fair resolution right now, like, what would that be? And the landscaper said, I would like to walk down the street and see this couple in the town we live in, and have them respect that I'm a good businessman and I do a quality work. And he said, I would like my money. But the key was what he said first. And that was the key to that solution. Like, after that was put on the table, the solution just kind of was there. So I can't emphasize enough kind of listening to what it is people are really interested in. And then once you have that, then you can start brainstorming how the creative aspects of the land can be used to meet the needs of each of the family members. It's been done before, and but that's just a very different way to approach a difficult conversation like this than, I mean, I don't know what the competitive option of this would be, is like, who is the most intimidating and powerful member of the family? And sometimes that goes back to childhood and, like habits that developed 30 years ago. I think, families have a lot of issues beyond the land. And when you're talking about the land, you want to try to limit it to the land as much as you can. That's a challenge. That's kind of a challenge with kind of trying to deal with maybe one of a few issues that families have. It's not just limited to the land. And at that point, you can call in all the experts that Paul's going to tell you about, and they can kind of give you all their options and help you move forward. So next slide, Paul. I think I just had 3 slides, but so if you feel like you might need to hire someone to help you with this difficult conversation, and I'm not saying that you do, there's some nice resources that you can look up that kind of give you a little bit more background on what I've just told you about. And it can be done. I mean, part of it is if a professional facilitator or a mediator comes in, the one thing that, a couple of things they can bring is not only the skill that they have, but also they are neutral. That's like the oath you sign when you sign up to be a mediator or a facilitator, is you don't take sides and you're kind of a neutral person. So that's helpful. So if you think that you've tried this before and it hasn't worked, that might be a key to think about this. If the idea of a family meeting is really stressful to you and maybe to your siblings or parents, you know, that's another indication that maybe you might benefit from some help. So you might have people who said that they're willing to try that, and that might be another indication. You know, it might be a situation where people are very entrenched in what they're saying, you know, that to get beyond what people's position is about the land to, you know, the place where I was talking about might seem like it's not going to be an easy thing to shift to. If there's lack of trust in the family, or if there's a very limited window for the family to kind of work this out. The stakes are high, then that makes that one meeting, you know, that you're trying to like do the best you can. This makes it even more nerve-wracking for you. So as I mentioned before, you know, there might be a lot of other issues in any family. I mean, I come from a family with 6 kids, and we didn't have land to deal with, but we had other assets to kind of figure out, and it was, you know, stressful. There's often a lot of stress around the care of older parents. I took a course in adult family mediation, which is basically where the children are adults and the parents are older adults. That's pretty common with land holding families, I think. So there are people that are experts in just that kind of facilitation too. So I think that's all I wanted to say was, you know, you might be able to just kind of prepare for a meeting and it'll go really well. Or you might be kind of like the spectrum that Paul showed before. You might be on the other end of the spectrum where makes you very nervous to think about it. And there are people who can help you with this. And I think Paul has he has a list of people you can look up for all the services that he's going to talk about. But there are people that can help you get through this if this is your main worry. And land is kind of a good resource to deal with, where you can find ways to increase the pie, as I was mentioning in the beginning. So I think that's all I had to say, unless there's another slide that I forgot about. I think that's it. So thanks, Paul. I think
Great.
Paul's program is really nationally renowned for estate planning help for forest landowners. I mean, he talks to people in a lot of other states, but the 10 or more years that they have experience doing this, they've really figured out how to do it. The only thing that's missing tonight is the coffee and apple pie that Paul would normally bring
Bob,
to everybody.
just wait for the last slide. I think
Okay.
you're going to like the last slide.
Good.
And thank you for those wonderful tips, because it is, without that, I mean, the goals in many ways are the foundation of the house, right? Without knowing where you're going, it's tough to plot a course to get there, and the family communication is just critical for that. And so thank you for pointing all of those great tips out. I appreciate it. And so I wanted to just close before we sort of open it up for discussion and questions. As Bob said, you know, there are a number of people locally that can help you, and I just wanted to make sure you could find those. So one of the things, we've done a number of resources and publications to help landowners. This is a website called masswoods.org, and this is my website here at UMass Extension. And so I've circled, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but I've circled a couple of things. One is a page called Future of My Land, and that has a lot of information about making decisions about what you'll do with your land. And the other one is a box down here on how to find a professional. So I did some screen grabs so we can just sort of walk through this. If you were to click deciding the future of my land, there's information there. There's a whiteboard video. There's related links and a number of documents that you can go through at your own pace and you know, find information that can help you move forward, find a professional, etc. And then if you were to go to the Find a Professional tool, you can type in any town in Massachusetts, and I've typed in Chesterfield just because that's where I'm from. You can, type in your town, hit apply, and I'm going to scroll through these screen grabs. This is what it would look like on your computer if you were to do this. But on the left-hand column of the results page are all professionals and organizations that can help you make decisions about the future of your land. So what will appear is our names of organizations that work in your town. So for example, in Chesterfield, our local land trust is one called the Hilltown Land Trust, and there is the phone number, website, and so forth. There are also statewide land trusts that you can contact for more information if that's of interest. You can also find the local public conservation agency. So in this particular case, these are the land protection specialists that work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Jennifer Howard, and our friend Peter Melanese from Mass Wildlife, Fish and Game. So they are the ones that you can call if you live in Chesterfield or have land in Chesterfield, and every town has this. So every town is tailored to the organizations. And then you can also find estate planning attorneys, CPAs, appraisers, surveyors that have experience with land conservation. And again, I would urge you that if you're going to move forward with a conservation-based estate planning, and I hope you do, that at some point you're going to have to bring in a professional to help you with that. And just like any other profession, things like estate planning attorneys have specialties. So some estate planning attorneys specialize in different things. You want to make sure you're working with somebody that has experience with land and that has experience with land conservation, if that's the direction you want to move, because that's not the case for all professionals. And you could risk not having your professional who doesn't have experience may not know all the options, or maybe learning on the job as they work it through with you. So this is a list actually from the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition, and they've surveyed their land trusts across the state to see who are some of these professionals out across the state that can help you. So no matter where you are, you can find somebody. And I would also just, this is the Protecting Your Legacy publication that Bob mentioned. We also did a startup guide. So I understand that, if you don't have the time or energy at the end of the day to work through, a 30-page or so publication, we've done like a 2-page publication, which is the startup guide, which distills everything down. So we have that and can send that to you. We also have a publication on using a will. One of the things that we found out when we did our survey is that about 2/3 of landowners plan to pass their land on in a will, which is good news. It's a good tool to use for that. However, when we interviewed landowners, we found that many of them weren't using the tool correctly. So it was not going to achieve what they thought it was going to achieve. So we developed a publication to help landowners think about that and consider, how to use a will to the best, to the highest and best use. I would also point out that our next webinar on November 10th, we're going to have an attorney talking specifically about wills and trusts and passing on your land using them. The other publication we have is about the Chapter 61 programs, and you can see we're having a webinar in January about that. The Chapter 61 programs can be a wonderful help to your conservation-based estate planning. They do tend to be a source of some confusion. And so, this program, this webinar in January should help you sort out between 61, 61A, 61B, and what the opportunities are and how it really fits into the other tools and documents to achieve your goals. So, but this publication is there, and there are also a number of resources, including a tax calculator on masswoods.org that allow you to put in your acres and your location and calculate your taxes under these programs, so you can run the scenario and see what it would do for you. But these resources are there for you. And I guess just a couple before we have our conversation, just what I'd like you to leave with. Know that land isn't like other assets. It's unique, it's flexible. I love the way Bob puts that we're not cutting up the pie. There are broader opportunities with land to get various values from it, personal and financial. And so recognize that you have options. There are tools and documents and professionals that can help you find out what combination of these that really fit your needs, fit your goals, and it's a matter of setting your goals to begin with, to help chart that course. And I would also suggest to you that for most landowners, this takes time. It can take, a year, 2 years. Everybody's busy with jobs and work and the pandemic and kids and whatever else may be going on in your life. Life is very complicated. So it can take time to have the conversation, to get information, to read it, to think about it, to talk about it, to make some decisions. So I would encourage you to start the process as soon as possible. And here you are on a webinar, so you're already doing that. That's fantastic. And hopefully our future webinars will help if that's a need. I wanted to just set up our next webinar, which is on November 10th. And our friend Elizabeth Sillen is going to come and talk. She specializes in wills and trusts, on succession planning. And she's done a number of programs for us in the past. She does a fantastic job. She and her family are also landowners in the Adirondacks. And so she speaks from a position of, from experience in terms of family dynamics and making decisions. She also served on the board of the Franklin Land Trust, or may currently. So she knows the conservation piece of it as well. So I would encourage you, if this would help you move along, to take part of this. If you haven't, you can register back at masswoods.org/webinars. Again, that's where we'll be putting this recording and all future recordings. And as Bob mentioned, I'm a guy that really believes in good food, and I think good food really facilitates good conversations. And in this global pandemic, it's been a little bit of a curveball for us. Normally, right now at a program, we'd all be eating delicious apple pie and some coffee. But to try to address that issue, we're thinking about trying to get pizza delivered to those people participating in our November 10th webinar. So if that's of interest to you, when you go to register, you just might find a question that asks what kind of toppings you like on your pizza and where you order your pizza from. And if we can work that out, we're sure going to do our best, because again, if we can take some pressure off of you so you can really focus in on the conversation, we want to do that. And if it helps facilitate good conversations, we certainly want to do that too. So with that, I'm going to stop the share. We've got a few minutes here. And so we'd be happy to answer any questions that people might have. Sarah, were there any questions in the chat pod?
I have a question.
Okay, Andy, thank you for breaking the silence.
I think my niece and nephew are in on this thing too here. Well, Danny and I have always talked about, we own a considerable amount of land, and we have a sawmill, and we have always talked about selling the land to the state and keeping the timber rights. Now that Danny's gone, I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't got a clue on how to do this. And I've talked with Nate and Kate about this. Maybe there's something you can do to guide us along here.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd be happy to connect you with someone that's working locally for the state agencies. My memory is you own a good amount of land in that Kinnybrook, Worthington, Chester, Huntington area. Is that right?
Well, we've got to be honest with you, there's pretty close to 3,000 acres, but it's all over the state. It's not just in one spot.
Okay. I'll tell you what, Andy, we must have your contact information because you registered. Is that right, Olivia? Yes. So I'll tell you, I will reach out to you tomorrow, and I can put you in contact with someone locally that's working for one of the state agencies, and they can start a conversation with you about that, and maybe talk to you about some options. And
again, this is a family thing. I want my niece and nephew to be involved in this. And Danny was always the one that did it for the last, you know, and I never had anything to do with it. He did it all, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't mean to suggest that I would just email. I'm happy to get all three of you on an email thread, or I'd be happy to set up a call and maybe talk through some options before you even make that contact. So why don't I reach out to you tomorrow and to all three of you, and we can have a conversation about how you want to move forward and how I can help.
They might want to postpone this for just a little while because, I mean, you know,
Right.
what happened.
I'm sorry. That was insensitive. I forgot. I was trying to be responsive. How about I reach out to you, and when you're ready, and
Okay,
all
that'd
three
be
of you
better.
are ready.
That would be
Yeah.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks, Andy. And again, I'm sorry for your loss. Are there any other comments or questions that people have? I know, unlike some of our more technical webinars, this tends to be about families and relationships, and so it may not lend itself as well to sharing, but yeah, go ahead, Trish. Thank you.
I just want to thank Bob for his presentation, and I think what he said made a lot of sense, and people don't realize the power of just listening to each other. They understand what's important, so not to be underestimated. I think that and your advice, Paul, too, to take it slow, and it's a process, and just keep listening to each other. I think that's really valuable. And I don't have land myself, but I'm on the local Greenway committee. So my hope is to meet with landowners to try to open up their minds. So I'm just trying to be educated about what's out there. So your website looks amazing. So thank you for your work.
Of course. Yeah, no, we're happy to help. So one of the other components of this project has been reaching out to local open space committees. So we've been running an annual conference for open space committees. So for those people that are interested in encouraging more land conservation and working with landowners in their communities, we've been trying to help you do that. And so we're in the process of starting a publication to help open space committee members that will be finishing up in the spring, and our open space conference. And actually we have a small grant program for municipal leaders and land trusts. So if you want to hold a program, do a mailing to landowners, anything along those lines, let me know, because we have some money for that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Joanne. Did you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I thought this whole thing was very clear, but I particularly liked Bob's comments. And I noted some of the book titles that he talked about. I'm going to look them up. I think it'll be very useful. And I wonder, Bob, if you feel this kind of conflict resolution might be helpful in the political climate now.
No comment on that, Joanne, but yeah, no, I think there's a lot of good, easy to read books about kind of how to approach this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one was how to deal with an angry public.
Yeah, that's more of a, I'm thinking these are more kind of for public officials, but I'll talk to Paul about like what are some resources for like there's people that do adult family mediation, not necessarily with land, but land often comes up, and there's like a group near Boston, and they've written like a little book about you know, how to approach conversations. I could give Paul that reference, but
Good. Okay.
yeah. I mean, it's you know, it's like anything you learned in school. There's a simpleness to it. It's just kind of trying it several times before you get comfortable.
Paul, did you see Mary's question in the chat about having 15 acres and not being sure how to get started? I'm happy to weigh in on that too.
Great. Go ahead, Sarah. That'd be great.
I think that's a really good question, and acreage certainly isn't everything. So I'd highly recommend looking at that tool and seeing what the local land trust is and having that first conversation with someone there or at the state agency, because they are going to take into account a variety of factors, and acreage is just one part of it. And we can also follow up. I'm happy to give you a call, or I'm sure Paul would too, if you'd like to have another conversation before you reach out, or if you want Paul or I to make an introduction on your behalf and help connect you, we're happy to do that too, if that's helpful.
Yeah, Mary, I would just add to that so I live in Chesterfield, which is a very small town, and like in all small towns, everything happens on Saturday mornings at the transfer station. And so one Saturday morning, I was approached by an older gentleman that I'm friends with from church, and he approached me and said, "You know all about that land stuff, Paul. I'm trying to decide what to do with my property. Can you help me with that?" And I knew he owned only about 10 acres. And I told him that I would do some homework on it and I would, get back to him. And I admittedly drove away thinking, wow, 10 acres. I don't know what I'm going to tell him. He's like the sweetest guy I know. Well, I go home and I look on the map and I pull up his parcel, and his parcel is the exact 10 acres that connects two very large core areas of prime habitat. And I was able to connect him to both organizations, and he was able to work out a solution with those organizations that protected his land. So I'm not necessarily saying that's going to happen to you, but just because it's 15 acres doesn't mean it's not important.
We have another webinar in this series. Maybe Olivia or Kate can bail me out with the date, but it has to do with mapping the ecological value of your land in the context of thinking about the financial value.
Great. Bob, did you want to add?
Yeah, I think your next session, or one of the upcoming sessions relative to focusing on open space committees is absolutely critical. The open space committees, I'm chair of the Hubbardson Open Space Committee, but that's where the boots are on the ground relative to interfacing with conservation commissions, potential properties, etc. And our committee is really pretty outstanding. But that being said, they're not necessarily experts on how to approach people with really viable properties. And so doing things to help educate open space committees, I think, is absolutely critical to the success of protecting lands, conservation land, etc. So that's a great thing to focus on.
Great. Thanks for that feedback, Bob. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Sarah and I've, over the last couple of years, really been amping that part of this component of our conservation-based state planning outreach up because we agree, and it's just awfully neighborly, right? I mean, we want to help our neighbors make good decisions about their land and make an informed decision, and open space committees are an important part of that network. So we hope to do more. Any other questions or experiences people want to share? We'd also, we talk to Andy and Mary, if there's information or contacts we can help people make, we're happy to do that. You could either tell us now, put it in the chat, or email us later.
I have a question. This is Rebecca Cutting. First, I just want to piggyback on what Bob was just saying about open space committees. It's a good place to start because every town's got to have them by statute in order to obtain funding to protect such properties. And yet it's not always the best avenue, depending on whether you have the Community Preservation Act passed in your town. But it's a good place to start to see what the towns are interested in preserving and if you're anywhere near them. My question for you sort of came out of Andy's question, which is retained rights. And I know you're not an attorney. I don't want to steal the thunder from that meeting, but has anyone here seen much of that? Because that's a novel idea to me.
When you say retained rights, Andy was talking about the timber rights, but were you talking about development rights?
Could be. I mean, I'm aware of the agricultural preservation, historic preservation. I used to work for what was then Food and Agriculture, surveying those properties. But I hadn't heard of retaining logging rights, and that's of great interest to me.
Yeah, well, you know, the example, again, without stealing the thunder of the conservation webinar, every piece of land, I guess the classic way to describe it is every piece of land, every right on a piece of land is like a stick. And you can, when you buy land, you buy it fee simple oftentimes, and you get the entire bundle of sticks. But those sticks can also be bought, sold, or donated individually as well. And that's the concept behind a conservation restriction, that someone continues to own the land, for example, but the stick, the development rights are extinguished in the land. So that's sort of the classic conservation example. But you know, timber is another one of those sticks that can be retained or sold. Typically in our area, we do fee simple, and we sell all of the bundle together. But you can do that. Yeah. Sarah,
So
do you want to?
it
Oh, I'm
would
sorry.
be
Go ahead,
under
Rebecca.
the conservation restriction. I was going to say it would have to be statutory authorization in some way, and so the CR would be the way to go.
I don't know about that. Bob or Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Well,
I'll just mention-
conservation
go ahead.
restrictions could, allow forest management. They often do. So yeah, let's go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, forestry is one of the most common reserved or retained rights we see in a conservation restriction. So if you want to keep owning the land, a conservation restriction 99% of the time is the good tool for that. I think what Andy was mentioning was different in that it sounded like the intent was to sell the property, that fee simple interest, but retain the ability to do timber management after the sale had gone through. The cases that I'm aware of in that context are with a state agency in a limited amount of time, usually a certain number of years after the sale, maybe 3 or 5 years, but that'd be something that'd be worth talking. And it's usually for one planned timber harvest. I'm not saying that's the only way this can work. That's the one scenario that I am aware of. But if you continue owning the property and use a conservation restriction, you have much more flexibility in how and when you conduct timber management in particular.
Thanks.
The other new idea that I've heard about in the last year is the New England Forestry Foundation has something called the pooled timber program, where they're trying to get like a very large group of landowners where somebody would always be doing a timber sale, and so everybody would benefit. So, the benefit would be like if you got to wait 20 years for your timber to be mature enough to harvest, if you join this program, you'd be able to get like a steady stream of income, and New England Forestry would manage the timber for you.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just a different approach to that. But yeah.
So I see that it's 7:59. I know everybody's had a busy day. I very much appreciate people's patience and hanging in there. I want to thank you for coming tonight. I hope that I see you all at future webinars, maybe over a slice of pizza. And we'd be happy to stay on the webinar and answer other questions. And please feel free to reach out to us if you have questions that you didn't want to ask, which is understandable, or if you want us to help follow up with some more resources or contacts. So with that, I'm going to stop recording. Feel free to stay on the line and we'll answer questions.